Between March 2021 and October 2023, 17 tourists disappeared on the hiking trails around Paraty, Brazil. The police said it was accidents, people getting lost in the Atlantic rainforest, falling from cliffs, drowning in waterfalls. The Tourist Bureau said it was carelessness, visitors underestimating the difficulty of the trails, not bringing enough water, not hiring proper guides. But I know the truth. Those 17 people didn't get lost. They didn't fall. They didn't drown. They were taken. They were transformed. And they were displayed like art installations in abandoned colonial ruins that dot the mountains around Paraty. Living sculptures that tourists photographed without understanding what they were looking at. My name is Daniel Carvalho. I'm 38 years old. I'm a photographer specializing in travel and cultural documentation. I've been working in Paraty for 6 years, documenting the town's colonial architecture, its festivals, its trails. I know every path, every waterfall, every forgotten chapel in the mountains. And in October 2023, I found something on the Caminho do Ouro, the Gold Trail, that made me realize I'd been photographing evidence of serial murder for 2 years without knowing it. This is what I discovered. This is the story the police still don't fully believe. This is the truth about the 17 tourists who came to Paraty seeking beauty and found something far darker. Paraty is one of Brazil's most beautiful colonial towns. It sits on the Costa Verde, the green coast, where the Atlantic rainforest meets the ocean. The historic center is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Cobblestone streets, white-walled buildings with colorful doors and windows, churches from the 1600s. It's like stepping back in time. But Paraty isn't just the colonial center. It's surrounded by mountains covered in dense rainforest. And cutting through those mountains are trails. Old trails, some dating back to the 1700s when Paraty was the main port for exporting gold from Minas Gerais to Portugal. Mules carrying gold would travel these paths through the mountains, down to the port and onto ships bound for Europe. The trails are called Caminhos do Ouro, gold trails. Today, they're popular with hikers and eco-tourists. The trails wind through primary Atlantic rainforest, one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. They pass waterfalls, swimming holes, viewpoints with stunning vistas of the mountains and ocean. And they pass ruins. Dozens of ruins, old fazendas, estates from the colonial era, abandoned centuries ago. Old chapels where travelers would pray before continuing their journeys. Old way stations where mule trains would rest. These ruins are scattered throughout the mountains. Most are overgrown, swallowed by jungle, crumbling stone walls covered in vines and moss. They're beautiful in a melancholic way. I've photographed them extensively for my work. Tourists love them. They're Instagram perfect. Mysterious ruins in the middle of the rainforest. I moved to Paraty in 2018. I'd been living in Sao Paulo, working as a commercial photographer, and I was burned out. I needed to escape the city. Paraty offered peace, beauty, a slower pace. I rented a small house on the edge of the historic center and started freelancing. Travel magazines, tourism websites, coffee table books about colonial Brazil. I made enough to live simply, and I spent most of my time hiking the trails, documenting. The first disappearance I heard about was in March 2021. A German tourist named Klaus Hoffmann, 42 years old, experienced hiker. He'd gone out on the Trilha do Sono, a popular trail that leads to a remote beach. He'd told his pousada he'd be back by evening. He never returned. The pousada owner reported it the next morning. Search and rescue teams went out. They searched for 3 days. They found nothing. No sign of him, no backpack, no clothing, no body. The police concluded he must have fallen from one of the steep sections of the trail. The body likely washed away in a stream or was hidden in dense vegetation. The case was closed after 2 weeks. I remember thinking it was sad, but not particularly unusual. The trails around Paraty can be dangerous. People do get lost. People do fall. The terrain is steep. The forest is dense. If you go off trail, you can disappear completely. In June 2021, it happened again. An American couple, Sarah and Michael Chen, both 35. They'd hired a local guide to take them on the Camino do Ouro. The guide, a man named João, who I knew casually, said they'd been hiking together for about 2 hours when the couple asked to stop and take photos at some ruins. João walked ahead to scout the next section of trail. When he came back 15 minutes later, they were gone. He called for them, searched the area, nothing. He reported it immediately. Search teams spent a week combing the forest around those ruins. They found Sarah's camera. It was lying on the ground near the ruins, lens cap off, as if she'd dropped it. But no other trace of the couple. The police questioned João extensively. They suspected he might have done something to them, but he had no motive. He passed a lie detector test. His timeline checked out. He'd called the authorities within 30 minutes of the couple disappearing. There was no evidence he'd harmed them. The police concluded the couple had somehow gotten separated from him and gotten lost, that they'd panicked and gone deeper into the forest instead of staying put, that they'd died of exposure or injury somewhere in the vast rainforest. The case remained open but unsolved. By December 2021, 5 tourists had disappeared on Paraty's trails, all on different trails. All experienced hikers, all vanished without a trace. The police started to notice the pattern. They held a press conference. The chief of police said they suspected the disappearances were connected, that someone might be targeting tourists on the trails. But they had no evidence of foul play, no bodies, no witnesses, no forensic evidence. They increased patrols on popular trails. They required all hiking guides to register with the tourism office. They posted warnings advising tourists to hike only with certified guides and to stay in groups. The disappearances slowed, only one in the first half of 2022. But then, in August 2022, 3 people vanished in a single month. The media started calling it the Trail Killer. Tabloids ran sensational headlines. Serial killer stalks Brazil's paradise town. International media picked up the story. Tourism to Paraty dropped by 40%. The local economy, which depends almost entirely on tourism, was devastated. Pousada owners, restaurant owners, tour guides, everyone was suffering. There was pressure on the police to solve the case, to find the killer, to restore confidence. But they had nothing. No leads, no suspects, just missing people and increasingly desperate searches that found nothing. I was following the story closely. As someone who spent so much time on those trails, I felt connected to it. I felt frightened. I'd hiked alone on many of those same trails where people had disappeared. I could have been a victim. I started being more cautious. I stopped hiking alone. I told friends where I was going and when I'd be back. But I also started paying more attention, looking at the trails differently, trying to understand where someone could be taking these people, how they could vanish so completely. In March 2023, I was hired by a travel magazine to do a photo essay on Paraty's historic trails. They wanted beautiful images despite the negative publicity. They wanted to show that Paraty was still safe, still worth visiting. I spent 2 weeks hiking and photographing. One of the locations I visited was an old chapel ruin on the Camino do Ouro. It's called Capella de Santo Antonio, built in the 1720s, abandoned in the 1800s, now just stone walls and part of a roof. It's about 3 hours into the trail, remote, beautiful. I'd photographed it before, but I wanted to get different angles, better light. I arrived in the late afternoon. The light was golden, perfect. I started shooting. The chapel sits in a small clearing. Forest surrounds it on all sides. The stone walls are covered in moss and vines. There's an altar area that's partially intact. I was setting up a shot of the altar when I noticed something strange. There was something on the altar. At first, I thought it was a statue, a religious figure someone had placed there. Maybe locals still use this chapel for informal worship, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a statue. It was a person, a woman. She was sitting on the altar, completely still, her back against the stone wall, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes open, staring straight ahead. She was wearing hiking clothes, a tank top, shorts, boots, and she was covered in vines, not just near vines, covered in them. The vines had grown over her legs, her torso, her arms. They wrapped around her like she was part of the forest. I called out to her, "Hola, você está bem?" "Hello? Are you okay?" She didn't respond, didn't move. I got closer. That's when I saw her face clearly. Her skin was grey, dried. Her lips were pulled back slightly. Her eyes were sunken. She was dead. She'd been dead for a while. But she was positioned, arranged, sitting upright in a pose that looked almost peaceful, almost meditative, as if she were a devotee praying at the altar. My hands were shaking. I backed away and pulled out my phone. No signal. I was 3 hours from the nearest town. I took photos. I know that sounds callous, but I'm a photographer. Documentation is instinct, and I thought the police would need evidence. Then I ran. I ran back down the trail faster than I'd ever moved. I reached the trailhead 2 hours later, gasping, covered in sweat. I found a police station in town and reported what I'd found. The police sent a team up the trail the next morning. I went with them to show them the location. It took 4 hours this time because they were moving slowly, being careful. When we reached the chapel, the body was still there, exactly as I'd seen it. The police photographer documented everything. The forensic team examined the scene. The lead detective, a man named Tavares, asked me questions. Had I touched anything? No. Had I seen anyone else on the trail? No. Had I noticed anything unusual before finding the body? I said no. But later I remembered something. The vines covering the body. They weren't just random. They'd been arranged, deliberately wrapped around her limbs, woven through her hands. It wasn't natural growth. Someone had placed them there, had styled the body like a sculpture. The police were able to identify the woman from dental records. Her name was Emma Larsson, Swedish, 31 years old. She disappeared in August 2022, 13 months earlier. The autopsy revealed she'd died of dehydration and exposure, but there were signs of prolonged restraint, marks on her wrists and ankles suggesting she'd been tied for an extended period. Bruising consistent with being forcibly positioned. The forensic report concluded she'd been held somewhere for several days, maybe a week, kept alive but restrained, and then she'd been brought to the chapel, positioned on the altar, and left there to die slowly. The vines had been added later, after death. Someone had returned to the body and decorated it. Detective Tavares called a press conference. He announced they'd found one of the missing tourists. He confirmed they were treating all 17 disappearances as homicides. He said they believed a single perpetrator was responsible, a serial killer operating on the trails around Paraty. The media exploded. International news covered the story. Serial killer in Brazilian paradise. The trail killer strikes again. Tourism to Paraty died completely. Hotels were empty. Restaurants closed. The town was in crisis. The police brought in specialists from Rio de Janeiro, criminal profilers, forensic anthropologists. They organized massive searches of the trails, looking for more bodies, looking for evidence. They found 2 more bodies in the following weeks, both in similar locations, old colonial ruins, both posed, both decorated with natural materials, vines, flowers, branches. Both had died of exposure after being restrained and positioned. The killer wasn't just murdering people, he was creating displays, installations, using human bodies as art in forgotten colonial spaces. The profilers said it indicated a specific psychology, someone who saw beauty in death, who wanted to combine human suffering with natural decay, who was making a statement about the relationship between humanity and the colonial past and the forest reclaiming everything. It sounded academic, detached, but it was helpful for the investigation. It suggested the killer was educated, artistic, someone with knowledge of the trails and the ruins, probably local, probably someone who'd lived in Paraty for years. The police started interviewing everyone connected to the tourism industry, tour guides, pousada owners, restaurant workers, anyone who interacted with tourists regularly. They interviewed me too. I understood why. I spent a lot of time on the trails. I knew the ruins. I'd found the first body. I was cooperative. I showed them my work, my photo archives, my schedules, everything. Detective Tavares seemed satisfied I wasn't involved, but he asked me something interesting. He asked if I'd ever noticed anything unusual in my photographs. Anything that seemed out of place in the ruins I'd documented. I said no. But it made me think. That night, I went through my photo archives, thousands of photos from 6 years of hiking and documenting Paraty's trails. I looked at every photo of colonial ruins, looking for anything strange, anything I'd missed, and I found something. In a photo from July 2022, I'd been photographing an old fazenda ruin called Fazenda da Pedra. There's a partial stone wall with empty window frames. I'd taken a shot of sunlight streaming through one of the windows. Beautiful composition, but when I zoomed in on the photo, I saw something in the background, in the darkness beyond the window, a figure. Sitting, it was blurry, out of focus, but it was definitely a person, sitting against the far wall of the ruin, completely still. I'd been so focused on the light and composition that I hadn't noticed there was someone in the background. I checked the date, July 2022. I cross-referenced with the list of missing tourists. Gabriela Santos, Brazilian, from São Paulo. Disappeared July 14th, 2022. I'd taken this photo on July 16th, 2022, 2 days after she vanished. I felt sick. Gabriela Santos had been in that ruin, alive or dead, and I'd photographed her without knowing. I immediately called Detective Tavares. I sent him the photo. He asked me to come to the station. When I arrived, he had the photo up on a large screen, enhanced, zoomed in. You could see more detail. The figure was definitely a woman. Dark hair, sitting with her back against the wall, arms at her sides, head tilted back. It was impossible to tell if she was alive or dead in the photo. But given that her body had never been found, Tavares believed she was already deceased when I took the picture. He asked if I had other photos from that location. I did. I'd taken about 40 photos of that ruin from different angles. We went through them one by one. In 3 of the photos, you could see the figure, always in the background, always sitting in the same position, always still. Tavares organized an immediate search of Fazenda da Pedra. The team went the next day. They found remains, skeletal remains, in the exact location where the figure had been sitting in my photo. Gabriela Santos, confirmed through dental records. She'd been posed just like Emma Larson, positioned to look like she was resting against the wall, natural materials arranged around her. The police realized something crucial. The killer was returning to the bodies. He was maintaining them, adding decorations, adjusting positions. That's why the vines on Emma Larson had been so deliberately arranged. The killer had come back, maybe multiple times. To perfect the display, Tavares asked me to go through all my photos again, looking specifically for figures in backgrounds, for anything that looked like a body. I spent 3 days doing nothing but reviewing thousands of images. I found 4 more. 4 more photos where I'd unknowingly captured bodies in colonial ruins, all from 2021 and 2022, all tourist disappearance victims, all posed in similar ways. The police used my photos to locate those remains. By May 2023, they'd recovered 7 bodies total. 7 of the 17 missing people, all displayed in ruins, all posed, all decorated. But 10 bodies were still missing. Detective Tavares developed a theory. He believed the killer was using specific ruins, not all ruins, just certain ones ones that were remote, hard to reach, rarely visited. He created a map, marking every colonial ruin in the mountains around Paraty. Then he marked which ones had contained bodies. He noticed a pattern. All the ruins were along the Camino de Oro, the main historical gold trail, and they were all ruins that had religious significance. Chapels, fazendas with private chapels, way stations where traveling priests would say Mass. The killer was choosing sacred spaces, or spaces that had once been sacred. He was creating a kind of macabre pilgrimage route. The police organized systematic searches of every remote chapel and religious ruin along the Camino de Oro. It took 2 months. It was grueling work. Some of the ruins were so remote they required full-day hikes to reach, but they found 5 more bodies, posed, decorated, in various states of decomposition depending on how long they'd been there. By July 2023, 12 of the 17 bodies had been recovered, but 5 were still missing, and the police still had no idea who the killer was. They'd interviewed hundreds of people, collected DNA from dozens of suspects, searched properties, reviewed security footage. Nothing, no solid leads. Tavares was frustrated. He told me privately that he believed the killer had stopped, that the increased police presence and media attention had scared him into dormancy, that we might never catch him unless he made a mistake or started killing again. In August 2023, I received a message on Instagram from an account with no profile picture and no posts. The username was just random letters. The message said, "Your photographs are beautiful. You see what others miss. Visit Capella de Luz. Dawn alone. Bring your camera." Capella de Luz, the Chapel of Light. I knew it. It was one of the most remote ruins in the entire region, a tiny chapel built in the 1750s. It's nearly 5 hours from the nearest trailhead. Very few people go there. I'd photographed it once, years ago. The message was clearly from the killer. He'd been following my work. He knew I'd been helping the police, and he was inviting me to see his work, or to become part of it. I immediately contacted Detective Tavares. He wanted to set up a sting operation, to have me go to Capella de Luz with undercover officers nearby. But the logistics were difficult. The location was so remote that coordinating backup would be almost impossible, and if the killer was watching, he'd notice police presence. We debated for days. Finally, Tavares made a decision. I would go, but I'd wear a wire. I'd have a GPS tracker, and I'd have a team following at a distance. If anything went wrong, they'd know my location and could get to me within an hour. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best option. On August 23, 2023, I started hiking toward Capella de Luz. I left at midnight to arrive at dawn, as the message had instructed. The trail was difficult in the dark. I used a headlamp. I was terrified. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like a person. The officers were following me. I could hear them occasionally on the radio, quiet check-ins, confirming my location. After 5 hours of hiking, I reached Capella de Luz just as the sun was rising. The chapel is small, maybe 20 feet long. Stone walls, no roof anymore. It sits in a tiny clearing. The forest presses in on all sides. I approached slowly. The chapel appeared empty. I walked inside. The morning light was filtering through the trees, illuminating the interior. And then I saw them. All 5 missing victims. They were positioned throughout the chapel. 2 were sitting on what remained of benches. 1 was kneeling at the altar. 2 were standing in the corners, all posed, all decorated with vines, flowers and branches, all in various states of decay. It was horrific, and it was beautiful in a terrible way. The way the light hit them, the way they'd been arranged, it looked like a congregation, like people who'd come to worship and had been frozen in time. I started photographing. I know I should have run, should have called for help immediately, but I needed to document this. The police needed to see this. And part of me, the photographer part, was compelled by the awful artistry of it. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "You understand, don't you? You see what I'm creating." I turned. A man was standing at the entrance to the chapel, 50s, thin, weathered face. He was wearing hiking clothes. He looked completely normal, completely unremarkable. I recognized him. His name was Paulo Mendes. He was a local. He ran a small tour company. I'd met him a few times at tourism events. He'd always been friendly, quiet. I activated the wire, made sure it was recording. "Paulo," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What is this?" "Art," he said simply. "A memorial. These people came to Paraty seeking beauty, seeking escape. I gave them eternity. I made them part of this place, part of history. You killed them." "I transformed them," he corrected. "Look at them. They're no longer tourists, no longer temporary visitors. They're permanent. They belong here now. They're part of the colonial past, part of the forest, part of the cycle of decay and renewal." He walked into the chapel, standing among the bodies like he was part of the installation. "For years, I've watched tourists come and go," he continued, "thousands of them, taking photos, posting on social media, consuming the beauty of this place without understanding it, without respecting it. They see Paraty as a backdrop for their lives, not as a place with its own meaning, its own soul." "So you decided to kill them?" "I decided to make them part of the place they claim to love, to give them permanence, to show them what it means to truly belong somewhere, not to visit, not to photograph and leave, but to stay forever." He was insane, but he was articulate, calm. He'd clearly thought through his justification. "The colonial ruins," he said, "they're proof that humans are temporary. These buildings were grand once, important, but the forest reclaimed them. Time erased them. That's the truth of existence. We're all temporary. But I can choose how that temporariness is expressed. I can create meaning in the transition from life to death. I can position these people so that their deaths become art, become part of the landscape, become eternal." I was trying to keep him talking. The police would be here soon. I just needed to stall. "How did you choose them?" I asked. "Randomly," he said. "Or maybe not randomly. Maybe I chose people who seemed particularly disconnected, particularly focused on capturing rather than experiencing. People who couldn't stop photographing long enough to actually see, like you." He took a step toward me. "When you photograph my work, do you see it? Do you understand what I'm creating? Or are you just documenting evidence?" I backed away. "The police are coming, Paulo. They know I'm here. This is over." He smiled. "I know. I saw them following you. They're about 40 minutes behind. That's enough time." "Enough time for what?" "To finish the installation. You're the final piece, Daniel. The photographer who documented everything without understanding, who looked but didn't see. You'll complete the congregation, the witness who becomes the witnessed." He pulled out a knife, not large but sharp. I ran out of the chapel into the forest. I could hear him following. I was screaming into the wire, telling the police I needed help, that Paulo Mendes was the killer, that he was chasing me. I ran blindly, crashing through vegetation. The forest was dense, disorienting. I could hear Paulo behind me. He wasn't running. He was walking, steady, patient, like he knew I couldn't escape. I don't know how long I ran. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 30. I lost all sense of direction, and then I heard voices. The police, they were calling my name. I screamed back, guided them to me. 4 officers emerged from the trees, weapons drawn. I collapsed, told them Paulo was close. They spread out, searching. They found him 20 minutes later. He was back at Capella da Luz, sitting among the bodies, calm. He didn't resist arrest. He just said, "It's finished now, the work is complete." Paulo Mendes was charged with 17 counts of murder. The trial began in March 2024. I testified. So did dozens of others. The evidence was overwhelming. Paulo's DNA was found on some of the victims. His property, a small cabin in the mountains, contained journals describing each kill in detail, sketches of how he wanted to position each body, plans for future installations. He'd been planning this for years, since at least 2019. He'd started killing in 2021. The trial lasted 3 months. Paulo showed no remorse. He insisted he was an artist, that what he'd done was conceptual work, that future generations would understand his vision. The prosecutor argued he was simply a murderer who dressed up his crimes with pretentious philosophy. The jury agreed. Paulo Mendes was convicted on all 17 counts. He was sentenced to over 400 years in prison. Brazil doesn't have the death penalty, so he'll spend the rest of his life incarcerated. He's currently housed in a maximum security facility in Rio de Janeiro. The families of the victims had closure, finally, after years of not knowing, of hoping their loved ones might still be alive somewhere. Now they knew. It wasn't the closure they wanted, but it was closure. Paraty slowly recovered, though it took time. The town implemented new safety measures. All trails now require registration. Solo hiking is discouraged. There are more rangers, more patrols. The town wanted to prove it was safe again. I still live in Paraty. I still photograph the trails, but it's different now. Every colonial ruin I see, I remember what I found there. Every photo I take, I look more carefully at the backgrounds, making sure there's nothing I'm missing, making sure I'm not documenting horror without realizing it. I think about what Paulo said, about tourists consuming places without understanding them, about photographs being a barrier between experience and reality. He was wrong about everything. His murders weren't art, they weren't meaningful, they were evil, but I do think about it. When I photograph now, I try to be more present, to see what's actually in front of me, not just compose a shot and move on. I go through my old photo archives sometimes, looking at all the images I took between 2021 and 2023, wondering how many times I walked past a body without knowing, how many times I was feet away from one of Paulo's installations and never saw it. How many photos contain evidence I still haven't found? It's haunting, the idea that horror can be right in front of you, that you can look directly at something terrible and not see it, that you can frame it, light it, capture it, and not understand what you're documenting. That's the real horror of what happened in Paraty, not just that 17 people were killed, but that their deaths were on display for years, that hikers walked past them, that tourists photographed the ruins where they were posed, that I photographed them, and no one saw, no one understood what they were looking at. We saw colonial ruins, we saw beautiful decay, we saw nature reclaiming human structures. We didn't see the bodies. We didn't see the victims. We didn't see the evidence of serial murder right in front of us, because we weren't looking for it, because we assumed the ruins were empty, because we saw what we expected to see. Beautiful ruins in a beautiful forest in a beautiful town, not a gallery of death. Paulo Mendes gave one interview from prison to a magazine in São Paulo. They asked him why he did it. He said, "Because no one was paying attention. I could create these installations, these perfect combinations of human form and natural decay and colonial history. And people would walk right past them. They'd photograph them without seeing them." That proved my point, that humans don't actually see anything anymore. They just consume images. They just take photos to prove they were somewhere, but they're never actually present, never actually witnessing. I made them witnesses. I forced them to be present, even if they didn't realize it at the time. Oh, the interviewer asked if he regretted anything. He said, "Only that it's over. I had plans for 30 more installations. I'd mapped out ruins all along the Caminho do Ouro. I was going to create a complete pilgrimage route, a journey through death and decay and the impermanence of all things. It would have been beautiful. It would have meant something, but you can't complete art from a prison cell." He's delusional. He's justifying murder with pseudo-intellectual nonsense. But what bothers me is that his installations did work on some level, not as art, but as camouflage. The bodies blended in. They looked like they belonged. Tourists did photograph them without understanding. I photographed them without understanding. He was right about that. We weren't seeing, we weren't paying attention. And 17 people died because of it, because a serial killer understood that hiding in plain sight doesn't require invisibility. It just requires people not looking for you. It requires people expecting to see something else. And we expect colonial ruins to be empty. We expect them to be abandoned. We expect them to be picturesque backdrops. We don't expect them to contain bodies. We don't expect beauty to hide horror. But it does, and that's the lesson of Paraty. That's what the 17 victims teach us. Pay attention. Look carefully. See what's actually in front of you, because horror doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits quietly in the background, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be seen, waiting for someone to finally understand what they're looking at. I visited Capella da Luz one more time, 6 months after Paulo's arrest, after the police had removed the bodies, after the forensic teams had finished, after the families had been able to bury their loved ones properly. The chapel was empty, just stone walls and forest, morning light filtering through the trees. It was beautiful, peaceful. It looked like it had always looked, like nothing terrible had ever happened there. And that's what frightens me most, how quickly places recover from horror, how easily they return to appearing innocent. The forest doesn't remember, the stones don't remember, the light doesn't change. Only we remember, only we carry the knowledge of what happened. And even that fades. In 10 years, 20 years, Capella da Luz will just be a remote colonial ruin again. Hikers will visit. They'll take photos. They'll marvel at how the forest has reclaimed the structure. And they won't know. They won't know that 17 people died on these trails, that their bodies were posed in these ruins, that a serial killer used Paraty's beauty as a canvas for murder. The memory will fade. The horror will be forgotten, and that's how it always is. Places recover. Life continues. Tourism returns. And gradually, everyone forgets. Everyone except the families. And people like me who documented it, who saw it, who know what these beautiful colonial ruins really are. They're not just history, they're not just architecture, they're crime scenes, they're graves, they're memorials to people who came seeking beauty and found death. I'll remember that. Every time I photograph Paraty now, every time I hike these trails, every time I see a colonial ruin, I'll remember what can hide in beauty, what can lurk in plain sight, what we miss when we're not truly seeing. The 17 tourists came to Paraty seeking paradise. They found Paulo Mendes instead, and now they're part of Paraty's history, forever, just like he wanted, just like he planned, but not as art, as victims, as warnings, as proof that beauty can hide horror, and that we need to look more carefully at the world around us, because sometimes the most terrible things are right in front of us, framed perfectly, lit beautifully, waiting to be seen.